Hola, Rafa. I originally chose to come to Colombia to build Polymath because of three main reasons. The first is the historical macroeconomic stability and the stability of democratic institutions, which is very important for building in emerging markets. The second one actually is the economic complexity of Colombia, especially relative to its size. So in economics, basically, it's very important to have different types of industries functioning in a country, and partly because of the historical isolation of Colombia, compared to other Latin countries, it has quite a number of industries, which means it has a diversity of talent to build a diversity of companies. The third reason is also related to talent. We really were very excited actually about the number of Colombians who had gone abroad for historical reasons, but were very interested or in the process of coming back to Colombia. And I think their motivations of coming back to Colombia were very important, or are very important. They are coming back to rebuild the country. And I think that type of motivation is the fundamental driver of what it takes to build scalable, transformative companies for a country, almost national treasures that then get exported to the region and to the world. Hola, Rafa. In terms of how easy it's been to build companies, I have to be honest and say that, of course, it has not been easy to build the 7 companies that we've built in Colombia since we came in 2012. I think that the main reasons are around talent, capital, as well as regulation and the unintended consequences of some of the legislations. So the first one around talent, we found very good founders, but actually in order to build great companies, you need quite a lot of talent, whether kind of young, up-and-coming talent or manager levels that are willing to take the risk. And I think for us, one of the hard things has been to find that talent at scale that's willing to take entrepreneurial risk. The second aspect is around capital. We found great angel investors. They take a long time to find, and they usually don't advertise in Colombia. But what's really missing is institutional investors, people who can invest several $millions into a company of risk capital. And usually that type of institutional investors in an ecosystem that is starting need to be supported by the government. Whether you're looking at Israel or Mexico or China, most of the venture capital funds, at least the first stages, the first time that those funds were created, it was backed by government money, or at least partially by government money. And in Colombia, that has not really happened. I think the other aspect of it is around regulation. I think there's been something like 3 tax reforms since I came to Colombia, and that creates a lot of uncertainty and a lot of relearning of what it takes, which is quite burdensome for a small company. I think the other aspects around regulation include labor laws, and I understand the desire to formalize labor and to get Social Security paid for by the employers, and I'm very in favor of that. But unfortunately, when there's so much informality, a lot of times the taxation or the increase in IVA, these things actually force more people to stay as informal, or to go from formal to informal. I think that many aspects of doing business in Colombia today actually penalize significantly small companies that are trying to grow. I think there are some small companies that will stay small, but for people like us, for the types of companies we're trying to build, there is a significant regulatory and administrative burden because we're trying to be formal. We're actually trying to formalize informal industries. But the process of growing and the burden for small companies that are trying to get big, or medium-sized companies that are trying to grow even further than that, is significant. And it's definitely more than I expected before coming to Colombia. Hola, Rafa. Of course, I'm not a policymaker, but I think that there's a few concrete areas where I think the government really can make a difference in stimulating the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Colombia. The first one is around either tax incentives for angel investors, which has worked quite well in both the US and the UK in terms of stimulating angel investors to not only invest in venture enterprises, but to invest that locally. I think the second one could be that a development bank, Bancoldex, or the like would actually seed first-time fund managers, because without good venture capital firms starting in the country, I think that it really limits the growth of even very ambitious and great entrepreneurs that have gotten their companies to a stage that is worth taking venture capital funding. The second category of regulatory things that I think would really help is around certain policies, probably particularly around tax incentives for companies of a certain stage, whether just starting or as they're going through a growth stage. I think whether it's around labor taxation or labor benefits or corporate taxes in the various forms, I think that that would be a way for the government to intervene effectively for these types of high growth potential ventures. I think the third category is actually thinking through, if the ultimate goal is to formalize different industries, but what are the stages of that, right? So a very high value-added tax is always going to actually penalize the number of service businesses that will want to formalize, because the cost of formalization is quite significant. There's also very, very complex things related to, for example, real estate and renting. Because it's so difficult for landlords to kick tenants out, even with cause, then the insurance needed or the down payment needed in order to rent becomes very onerous for both individual renters, but especially for businesses, and that has a significant capital cost for those of us, for example, at Polymath, where we're starting businesses that are, of course, some of them are tech-driven, but some of them have physical locations, and that type of capital cost really constrains our ability to grow in the early stages. So those are some of the ideas that I think would be really helpful towards growing entrepreneurial and high-impact ventures.